Obama promised 3 weeks ago not to send combat troops back into Iraq to fight against the insurgency. But ever since then, those insurgents have been gaining ground. So what if they set up terrorist training camps? Will drones do the trick? How about covert operations? My next two guests are experts on just those topics. Jack Devine surely knows the spy game. He was at the CIA for 32 years, including stints as both acting director and associate director of the CIA's overseas operations. His book, Good Hunting, An American Spy Master's Story, was recently published. And Greg Johnson is a journalist, scholar, and expert on the use of drones. He is the author of Refuge, Yemen, Al-Qaeda, and America's War in Arabia. Greg, let me start with you. You had a very interesting piece in which you said you will not be able to do what the United States has done in Yemen, which is use drones and kind of zap bad guys when you see them in Iraq. Explain why.
Right. So Yemen and Iraq are completely different. In Yemen, Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, the group that the U.S. is hitting, they're hiding in mountains, they're up in the hills. In Iraq, the group, the Islamic State, as they're now calling themselves, they're mingling with the population in the cities. And so what I think we have is the U.S. in Yemen is really trying to bomb Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula as a way of containing the group so that the group doesn't send any bombs to the United States. We don't have another underwear bomber. We don't have another cartridge bomber. In Iraq, it's different. What you're trying to do is you're trying to uproot this group from territory that they've taken. Drones are amazing, but they can't solve every problem.
And so if you're trying to get them out of territories, you can't use the drone. And the problem with using them in cities is that, of course, you'll have massive civilian casualties since they'll be intermingled with the population.
Absolutely. I think the thing that is the weak link when it comes to drones is, you can hit the car driving down the road and you can hit nothing else. But if you don't have the intelligence, if you don't have the spies on the ground to know which car to hit, then you're going to hit civilians, and then we're going to have a problem like we've had recently. So what we see is the U.S. has been bombing, using drones in Yemen for the past 4 years. But instead of Al-Qaeda getting smaller in Yemen, Al-Qaeda is getting bigger. And that's a real problem for the Obama administration. And if they try to do the same thing in Iraq, my worry is that the same thing will happen in Iraq, that the group will get much bigger instead of being reduced in size.
Jack, you've dealt with these kind of situations all over the world. When you look at what's happening in Iraq and Syria, and if you were back in your old job and told your job is to make sure the terrorists don't gain strength, find them and help us kill them, what would you do?
First of all, I think problem solving usually begins by having the plumbing in ahead of time and anticipating a problem. And I'm hopeful that that's what we have here. Not all Sunnis are supportive of ISIS, okay? So there are groups that we have worked with before.
And when you say plumbing, you mean you hope that the CIA has been putting in place friends, allies, informants in Iraq?
Exactly correct. Because I think Greg's point is right on target. If you don't have the sources, your drone effort is not going to be very good. It's only going to be effective if you have high-quality intelligence. And it is not the end. That is not the solution. Drones are not, I agree 100%, are not going to solve the problem. But I do believe it's part of the package.
What you're describing, it seems to me, is your fear that if you use drones, you produce more of a backlash and grows the insurgency or the terrorist group. Mm-hmm. If that's the case, why have we been using drones so much over the last 5 years, and why are we proclaiming it a big success?
Right, that's a very good question. In President Obama's commencement address at West Point, he said U.S. actions have to meet a very simple test. They have to kill more terrorists than they produce. And right now, the U.S. is not meeting that test. So you look around the Middle East, you look in Yemen, you look in Iraq, in Syria, in North Africa, in Libya, and in Egypt, and in other places, and it seems like the problem is growing instead of being tamped down. And I think one of the problems, and I agree completely with what Jack said, is that you can't go at it, you can't wait and wait and wait, and then wait for a crisis and then act. You have to be going all along. And I think the problem that the U.S. has had over the past several years is that we've been burned so much as a country by being in the Middle East that we want a hands-off policy, and so we do nothing for such a long time. And then things reach a crisis point, and then it's all or nothing. And that, I think, is a real problem.
I think Greg and I, the love fest is going to end right here. In other words, I think the drones have been immensely successful when you look at their application, and we've taken out so many of the al-Qaeda leadership, 2/3. I don't think there's a direct line between those attacks and the growing problem that we have of advocates. We have a much more serious problem in the sectarian Sunni Shia struggle that is producing warriors for their side. It's not tied directly to the drones.
And one of the big lessons that you talk about in your book from Afghanistan is complete withdrawals tend to leave you with very few options.
That's right. That's where I'm an advocate for using the agency. When you withdraw, you leave behind the agency maintaining the plumbing, adding to the plumbing, so that when circumstances require, you're not starting from ground zero.
I love the terminology. Maintain the plumbing, keep the agency. Greg?
Yeah, so just on Jack's point, the U.S. has done a spectacular job of eliminating people in Yemen. They've killed people like Anwar al-Awlaki, the American-born cleric, Saeed al-Shihri, a former Guantanamo Bay detainee who is second in the organization. But they've killed these people, and yet the organization isn't crumpling like many thought it would. You're cutting off the heads, but the organization continues to grow. And so I think what the U.S. is facing is the U.S. is faking...
They haven't been able to execute any major terrorist attack in the Western world for a while.
Right, they haven't, but they've come very, very close. And we're continually worrying about the bomb maker Ibrahim Asiri. We are hearing reports that he's just pledged the oath of allegiance to the new self-described caliph. And I think the problem is that this is a new type of war for the U.S., and this is a type of war in which success may not be best measured by body bags. So just because we kill more people and just because we kill leaders doesn't necessarily mean that the U.S. is winning a war like this.
Fascinating, sobering conversation as well.